Good morning. I have always primarily considered myself a farmer, and I am most happy when I am out amongst my crops. Here in Virginia, I have begun experimenting to find the best way to yield the most from the land as possible. To that end, I have begun crop rotation. Now, there have been others who have experimented in this, but the pattern that I have found that works best here is if we plant, as you see behind me, either corn or potatoes in the first year, in the next year, wheat, after buckwheat that is to be used as manure, and then wheat again, and then for 3 years after, clover and grass. Now, to many farmers, it is much distressing to imagine leaving a field fallow for any amount of time. You could be getting crops year after year. But in fact, we have found that this causes the ground to yield far more of the crops and a much more bountiful harvest. And so I am hoping to get my neighbors to agree to follow this pattern so that they might too see the same success. I feel it is the responsibility of someone as myself who has a larger farm and can make mistakes in experimentation to do all they can to encourage and find new ways of farming. To that end, I've also found that if one takes fish guts that we pull from the river and mix it with animal dung, marl, river mud, and also some plaster of Paris, it makes an excellent manure for the soil, making it much richer. Now, I have found this after many years of experimenting. But again, I feel that if we are able to find new ways to be much more modern in our farming, it will be an encouragement to our neighbors, to our domestic products that go to market. I am not certain, as we move further west, if it will hold true in all places, but there is much to be done. And I, as I said, can risk where the neighbor that is nearby from a smaller farm might be still using the same techniques that his grandfather and great-grandfather, even before him, used without thinking about the fact that there is progress being made. I'm especially thinking of the works of Mr. Arthur Young, which I've had the honor of corresponding with. He and I have discussed many times the best ways to farm here in Virginia, as opposed to where he is in England. Next, I would like to show you something that I'm quite pleased with, and that would be my treading barn. In the year 1763, I shifted my crops from planting tobacco to, well, largely farming wheat and other corn of other types. In fact, I have some 32 crops that I grow here. But the shift from tobacco was very important. Tobacco is very detrimental to the soil, and it depletes it rather rapidly. And after a number of years, many planters simply move on to another parcel of land. But I've always sought for ways to rejuvenate the land. And so this shift has been very advantageous. There are two main ways to separate your wheat from your chaff. And the first would be, of course, threshing, which is to beat with a flail. The other is treading with horses. Now, treading with horses, it's much preferred by many because it requires less labor, but I do not feel it is usually as efficient. Here, I decided that I would switch to flails and I would build a barn so that we would not see the same spoilage we had. You see, it was normally done in the yard right beside a barn. And because of that, with the weather being so variable here in Virginia, quite often we would lose our crops when the rain began. Up to 50% of our crops would be lost every year this way, which was very distressing. So I thought if I built a barn, the threshing could go on within it. Unfortunately, it was not too long before I returned. I was at war at the time when this was all being done. And we began to see that there would be no efficient way to do this because when one flails wheat under cover, it creates a chalky and choky dust. The men refused to do so. It was almost impossible and became unbearably hot during the days when we did it. From there, I saw that they had returned immediately back to treading, and recognizing that treading was the easier method, even if not the most efficient, I decided to build a barn where the treading could be done so that we could again avoid the weather loss. This is the product, a 16-sided barn. Now, there have been others who have created barns for this purpose before, but this one was of my design. Even down to the boards, I selected the distance that would be between each board so that the wheat would fall through properly to below where it would be gathered up. And we have seen our crops increase in productivity. We now see up to 95% of our wheat actually successfully be separated. Quite an improvement.
Well, good day. My name is Priscilla, and I'm an enslaved field worker here at George Washington's Dogue Run Farm. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that we have very long and hard days, so I'm up fairly early in the morning. I'm up at about 6:15, and I make sure that all 6 of my children are up and awake as well. Myself and my 2 oldest girls, Sophia and Savory, we're all field workers together, so that means the chores of our home are left to my 2 middle children, Penny and Israel. Now, I give them instructions for the day, and I urge them to take care of my 2 youngest children, Christopher and Isaias. We'll leave them at about 6:15, and we'll receive our job assignments for the day from Robert Garrett, the overseer. We'll start the day's work, and then by about 9 o'clock, that's when breakfast will be served. Now, it's nothing fancy. It's a cornmeal pancake or a hoe cake. We'll have breakfast for about half an hour, and then it's right back to work. Not too long after this, though, that's when I'll see George Washington on his horse, doing his daily rounds. Mr. Garrett will give him the information about the day's work, and I can't imagine it's anything too interesting, for the conversation doesn't last fairly long. And then we'll work throughout the day doing whatever needs to be done. And then 2 o'clock is when dinner is served. Now, the farm's enslaved cook, Molly, she'll prepare a stew, typically. And again, it's nothing fancy. Enslaved people only receive small rations of cornmeal and salted fish throughout the week. So we'll have dinner, and then it's right back to work. And we'll work until the sun goes down, or about 8 o'clock in the evening, and then we'll finally head home for the day. Myself and my 2 girls will arrive home, and Penny and Israel will let us know about their events of the day. And perhaps if Penny is kind enough, she has prepared a small supper for us from our own family garden. Now, if we are truly lucky, we'll be able to see my husband, Joe, in the evening. Joe is a ditcher on Mansion House Farm, and he's only truly permitted to see us on Sundays. But Joe still finds the time and takes the risk to see it, to night walk the 3 miles from Mansion House Farm all the way here to Dogue Run. He'll arrive at about 9:30 in the evening, and the children are very excited to see their father, and I am, of course, very happy to see my husband. We'll all retire to bed at about 10 o'clock in the evening, and then, of course, the next morning starts very, very early. Joe himself has to be up and out of the house by 4:30 in order to make his way back to Mansion House Farm. It is very frustrating, the lengths we have to go to be able to see each other, but the time we have, as short as it is a blessing nonetheless. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to tend to the day's work.